Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slash Filmcast. I'm David Chen, and with me are.
Devendra Hardawar.
Jeff Kanata.
And joining us today, she is managing editor and chief film critic at Pajiba.com. Christy Puchko, welcome back to the Slash Filmcast. Christy, how
Hey
you doing
guys.
today?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm excited to talk Toy Story 4.
Yeah, that's
All
what we're going to
right.
be doing today. And Christy, I think Pajiba.com recently celebrated its 15th anniversary. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, as far as Dustin can pin down a number, because he kind of started it haphazardly. But I mean, it's really an incredible thing. Like, it was basically something he started with some friends, and 15 years later, like, we have writers around the world, and we have really fun pieces every day. Some of them that are political, some of them are about entertainment, some of them are really, really weird, but all of them I'm pretty proud of. Yeah, it's a great family. Like, I've written a lot of places, but my heart belongs to Pajiba. Like, I really found my voice there because or the readership is just so intense, and like you want to appease them, and like the fellow writers are so encouraging that you want to live up to the standards that they set in their own writing. Like, I'm very lucky. They're really a wonderful place to write.
And you must have been, what, 6 when it started?
Yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah.
I'm just a baby. It's great.
So, Pajiba.com, great site. Pajiba.com is where you can get to that site. And I recently enjoyed one of your articles there, Christy, entitled "The Film Twitter Meltdown That Started with a Creepy Craft Project."
Yeah,
And
that was fun.
this is a great article because it kind of like Twitter goes by so quickly, right? And one of the things I don't like about it is like we as people who use Twitter experience lots of amazing moments on Twitter, and they're just like lost forever, like tears and rain, to quote.
Yeah.
What's Rutger Hauer in Blade Runner, right? And so
Yeah, it really is the
He was
saddest
totally
thing
talking about
life.
Twitter, actually.
Yeah.
That's a really good analogy.
he was talking, yeah, and it's like it's just gone forever. And what this article does that you wrote for Pajiba.com is it takes like moments like that and preserves them forever so that people can remember all the sick burns that people got in when they're trying to own someone. In this case, an account that really deserved it. This is like an account called @RareHorror, which it's one of these many accounts that makes a career or a living off of ripping off other people's work. And they like share other people's work without crediting them. And in this case, they got called out for not crediting this really cool Etsy piece about like that was a recreation of Samara from The Ring. And so they called out and they doubled down on it. Christy, you want to tell us a little bit more about like what happened here?
Yeah, so it was kind of a funny thing. So it's one of those things that happened over the weekend, which I often write stuff for Pajiba that's kind of like, so here's what happened on Twitter when you weren't paying attention. Because as you said, like people like being on Twitter, but they also really like not being on Twitter. But they still want to know what happened.
Yes.
So sometimes my pieces are just being like, so let's talk about this. But this one was like really playing Twitter detective because it got shady. So basically, @RareHorror, at the time that it posted this piece, which is an amazing embroidery that was created by Stab and Stitch, which is an Etsy shop that's run by Claire McDougall. And she had created this really cool Samara thing, and they posted it and said, nice art piece on Etsy, Samara from The Ring. But like, didn't say who the artist was, didn't say like, any way to identify it. And when people were like, yo, credit the artist, which is a very common refrain on Twitter. For those of you that aren't on Twitter,
Yep.
it's
extremely reasonable too.
Right. It's kind of, we're still figuring out the etiquette of social media, and I get that. But like this specifically, you're commending the piece. So just say who did it. Like, you don't have to say, here's the link, buy it here at Etsy or whatever. But instead of like just being like, oh yeah, like they could have just created a follow-up tweet that was just like, oh right, sure, here's her shop, like her name is this or whatever, and like not made a big deal out of it.
Would have ended right there if they'd done that.
Yeah,
would have just
it 100% wouldn't
right
have been
there.
a big deal.
Yep.
But instead, they like started justifying to people why they chose not to include her. So it wasn't a mistake. It was something they said they were choosing to do. And they were saying that it would look like an ad if they included the link. But again, people were just saying like, well, say her name. Like we can Google the name.
Yeah.
And then they were justifying that some people had gone to Etsy and found it anyway. So that proved they didn't have to do that. But we all know how lazy people are on the internet. Like it's amazing somebody did that. And that seems several people did do that. But like, why go out of your way not to credit her? It just seemed very kind of convoluted. And so then not only did they tell people like, oh, well, we're not doing it because of this, this, and this, but then they like also just started insulting people. I don't want to offend your readers by saying some of the things they said, but it was terrible. There was a lot of curse words. They called a lot of people morons. And then basically that got more people upset where they were like, what are you doing? Like, this was such a simple solution. And now you're just being jerks. And so then it got to the point where like horror Twitter is a very passionate corner of Twitter.
Indeed.
And it's a very protective of its own corner of Twitter. And so this made a lot of people mad because this is an account that at that point I think had 96,000 followers that was like exploiting these artists who were creating really cool like horror fan art so that they could get followers. And then when people were like, well, just give them credit, like that costs you nothing. Then it came up that on their website, it actually said that they sell tweets. So it was suggested that maybe if you paid them, that's when you actually get credited. And I don't know. I just shared the screen grabs from their website, which are on our thing, which I said later, I included a lot of screen grabs mostly because over the course of the weekend, I noticed they were deleting some of the more offensive things they were saying to people. So I embedded tweets that used screen grabs. I used other screen grabs that I had taken because I was like, they're clearly trying to like change the tracks of this story. And then basically there were horror directors and producers and actresses who were sharing the Samara work with a link.
Right.
As whether to directly comment on Rare Horror or to like subtweet them. And then like another horror site did that. And then Rare Horror got mad at that horror site and said they're stealing our content, which was like, like that was when it just went galaxy brain where you're like, wait, like what's happening? So like, all this was going on over the course of the weekend. And like when I woke up on Monday morning, I was still kind of like, it was still being talked about on horror Twitter. And I said, to my editor, is this interesting to anybody that's not like on horror Twitter? Is that enough of are our readers going to be interested? But one, horror Twitter was really receptive to the article. I think one, because it showed us in a positive light where it showed us as being really supportive of people who are creative versus people who are trying to exploit the creative to do something to their own ends or whatever. And a lot of like it got the writer or the creator, Claire McDougall, a lot of attention. We use her image as the header image, but we credit her and we repeatedly mention in the piece where you can find her work.
Yeah, I thought that was a nice touch.
Well, because I mean, that's what we're talking about here. It's just like, I think on the internet, everybody likes to think everything is free, and that's just not fair. And that's not true. And like, the guys at Rare Horror, I don't know what their deal is, but then they started doing damage control, where at one point they brought her into it, and she actually joined Twitter because this was all happening. And they were basically like, hey, can you tell people that we're not jerks so that they'll back off? And she did. But then they like turned on her, and why is very confusing. And like I tried to piece together like my theory on why in the article, but like honestly, it just seems out of nowhere. Where then they just start blaming her for everything and being like, you're the reason we're getting such hate. And it's like, what is happening? So it was a very, very bizarre thing. And they also at one point decided to tell people specifically like, oh, well, your opinion doesn't matter because you only have 111 followers, but we have 96,000. So because they specifically mentioned how many Twitter followers they had at the start of this, people kept clocking how those numbers were dropping. Yeah. So it was just like a spectacular, like, and not
it was the
long.
thing. I was checking in on it like little by little and just seeing it like explode, and it was kind of fascinating just to see this whole meltdown. Yeah, because
like it went on all weekend where they just kept saying negative things to people.
Where did this end up, Christy? Like TLDR.
So yeah. So basically, by like I think Monday afternoon, we posted the article, and I was kind of curious to see just if anybody, like, what people would think of the article, what people would, I was hoping it made sense because I'm trying to, like I said, like play Twitter detective and be like, there's missing pieces and I'm trying to glue all this together to show you what happened. And especially because so many of the tweets got deleted. But effectively, not long, I think it was within an hour of our post going live, which may be a coincidence. I'm not taking credit, but their site got locked to private. So only their followers could see what they were saying anymore. And then some of those followers were sharing tweets which was basically them continuing to be upset about the fact that they felt like they had been treated really badly by the internet. And then it got weird because they changed their handle to Rarer Horror so that people wouldn't be tweeting at them. But then another account popped up like that day that was also at Rarer Horror. And that's where like it said something like, it's not fun anymore, we're not doing this. So it's very kind of confusing. Effectively, they're shuttered. But like how it all fell apart in the end is a little shady because we don't know like what happened. But yeah, their account doesn't exist anymore.
I like how this site also just sounds like the rural juror. Basically,
yeah,
yeah.
Well, and some people like then just started dunking on them for being like, you're sharing like fan art from a wildly popular film franchise. This isn't rare. Like, so
You're good.
In the way of Twitter. But I think the upside to all this, because they behave really badly, but the upside to all this was that like horror Twitter really stood up for the artist and stood up for creative people. And like you saw this woman get a lot of attention, a lot of fans. She said she got a lot of orders. She reached out to me actually afterwards, which was really nice. She just sent me a message to say she appreciated the piece, which was cool. And I told her congratulations. I think what she's doing is cool. And like now she got all this attention. So I'm sorry that she got such weird backlash from them, but this was cool. And Mike Flanagan wrote to her personally and said that he ordered the Samara thing.
Yeah,
so
that's
like,
right. I saw that.
Yeah,
all
like,
ends well.
Yeah.
Right. Like it was a story about like how to behave badly on the internet, but I hope it'll be and I'm glad that we have all the screen grabs because it's a nice cautionary tale of like there was totally a way to fix this really early on, and even like later if they had been remorseful. But they basically, I saw one tweet that said they were sorry, but it was a screen grab after they had already locked their account. So like, what do you want us to do with that? You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm not going to miss Rare Horror. I didn't like write this article in hopes to bring them down. I just wanted people to understand that like there is a reason to just credit the artist. How hard is it?
Yeah.
You know, like I like this thing. Here's who did it.
They're the rarest of horror now on the internet.
Indeed.
Yes,
Moral of the story, you know, if in doubt, credit the artist. And I'll admit I don't 100% do that. You know, like sometimes I miss the mark, but I try to do that. And you can find articles like that one entitled "The Film Twitter Meltdown That Started with the Creepy Craft Project" at pajiba.com, which is where Christy writes, and we'll link to it in the show notes. So this week we are going to talk about some what we've been watching, a bunch of stuff we've been watching we want to mention, and then we're going to review Toy Story 4. Before that, though, we got a few announcements. We also want to read some emails. I want to make a couple of important announcements. One is that we are going to be moving podcast hosting companies this week. So in our nomadic podcast existence, we are moving to another company. And that means like stuff is probably going to break. And so some of the links might not work, and some of the feed stuff, or you might need to like refresh in whatever app you're using to download us. And so sorry in advance. If you have issues, tweet at us, email us at /filmcast@gmail.com. We'll try to resolve them as quickly as possible. But yeah, we are moving podcast hosting companies. And so hopefully in a couple weeks, it'll all be all set. But if you experience any difficulties, let us know. And be specific. Like, let us know what the issue... Like, don't just tweet at us and like... Oh, I couldn't download the podcast. It'd be like, you know, like I was using this iOS on this device, and like, you know, at this time of day, you know, like be specific so we can try to reproduce the problem if possible, and we will try to fix it. But yeah, a couple weeks should be solved. All right. Yeah. Other thing I want to announce is I got I woke up on Saturday morning with the mother of all sore throats, and had like this horrifyingly painful postnasal drip. It is now slightly better, but I may cough or say something, you know, like I might sound weird compared to usual. And if I do, like, we'll try to edit it out, but we might not edit all of them out. And so just wanted to throw that out there as well. And finally, wanted to get to your emails. So on last week's episode of the podcast, we discussed an email from a listener named MJ, who had tried to shame Devendra Hardwar for recommending a movie called Hotel Mumbai. And Devendra, this guy, MJ, said that you'd recommended Hotel Mumbai because it has Dev Patel kicking ass.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, Hotel Mumbai does not have Dev Patel kicking ass.
But what he did not know...
Yeah. But what he did not know was that Devendra never recommended Hotel Mumbai. He recommended an entirely different film called The Wedding Guest.
Yes.
And even though both films contain Dev Patel, they not all Dev Patel movies are created equal, I think is really what we concluded. And so after we discovered this in the podcast last week, MJ emailed us and he said, quote, "Hey, thanks for reading my email on air. I am thoroughly schooled and embarrassed. My apologies to all, especially Devindra, who has a high bar of recommendations for me. So when I saw Dev Patel's face pop up on iTunes with Hotel Mumbai, I immediately Mandela affected the title out of excitement and subjected my wife to the perils of my own shitty memory. Turns out The Wedding Guest features a wonderful ass-kicking Dev Patel in full Jason Bourne mode, and you can quote me on that, even though I had to watch it alone." End quote. So that it comes in from MJ, writing in to apologize to Devindra Hardawar, as well he should.
Yeah. So it goes.
And he referred to the Mandela effect in that email. You guys familiar with that phenomenon?
Mm-hmm. It comes into effect when I watched that awesome Sinbad movie.
Yeah. So it's this idea
the
that
Sinbad genie movie that we all remember from our youth when we were reading Berenstain Bears books.
Yeah, Berenstain Bears. Right. The idea is basically like when you have like false memories, essentially. That trick you. And Berenstain Bears, like a lot of people think it was. I'm one of the people that always thought it was spelled Berenstein, and now that it's revealed to be Stain, I actually think we are now living in an alternate reality. So I am one of those believers. But Mandela effect is a real thing. Okay, another email. This one comes in from JD, who writes into /filmcast@gmail.com. Now, so. This is a long-running /filmcast theme of Jeff not wanting his child to be spoiled on The Empire Strikes Back before they've seen The Empire Strikes Back. Right?
I'm sorry, that was a really intense place for a pause. I was like, Jeff not wanting his child. I was like, I missed that.
Jeff does not want his child.
Period.
I'm sorry. Also accurate. Some nights accurate.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's okay.
This would be one of those nights. This was a tough one.
The Empire Strikes Back. You don't want your kids to be spoiled on The Empire Strikes Back. You want to show it to them before they've been spoiled. And somebody in a previous email brought up that, hey, Toy Story 2 spoils The Empire Strikes Back. But JD writes in to clarify. I just heard. I'm a couple weeks behind the podcast. I just heard the discussion where you were horrified to learn that Toy Story 2 spoils Empire Strikes Back and vowed never to show it to your children. I just want to clear things up for you. There is a joke in Toy Story 2 that goes like this: Buzz Lightyear speaking to Zurg. "You killed my father." Zurg says, "No, I am your father." Buzz says, "No." It is then followed up by lots of jokes about their relationship, which are quite funny. That is it. Although it is an obvious nod to the big reveal in Empire Strikes Back for those of us who've seen that movie, no context is given linking the two movies in any way. They do not say Luke or Vader's name or Star Wars or anything of any kind. I am, if possible, even more spoiler-averse than you are, and was mortified to discover all of the spoiler-fixed stuff hidden in kids' movies. My daughter is now 16, so I went through all this years ago. I just want to assure you that using my own personal experience, my daughter watched Toy Story 2 hundreds of times before seeing Star Wars. We even waited probably a lot longer to show her Star Wars than you are going to wait. My wife has a master's degree in child's development, so she's a stickler to not expose kids to things too young. We watched Star Wars together when my daughter was about 12, and she was devastated by the twist. She was even more upset than Luke. Toy Story 2 did not
That's what I want. I want
Story
to devastate my children.
Toy Story 2 did not spoil it for her because it gives no context. Just like you missed all the inside jokes in Detective Pikachu, your children will miss the reference to a movie they haven't seen.
But there are 100 other things, by the way, that will spoil Empire at some point, right? It's a pretty renowned thing to reference.
I actually grew up watching Spaceballs, having never seen a Star Wars movie, and was still surprised when they did I saw them when they did the re-releases, and I was like, what? This is so crazy. It's so much like Spaceballs, guys. No, I at that point understood it was a parody, but like when I was a kid, I was just watching a movie and I didn't understand. And then when I was older, I was like, oh, but I still like when Luke and Leia kissed, I was like, aw. My friend was like, what is wrong with you?
Indeed.
Like, it's possible.
I think we buried the lead on this email here, Dave.
Mm-hmm. What's that, Jeff?
And maybe the author himself buried the lead when he said, my wife, who's a child psychologist, is a stickler about not showing things to kids too early. A stickler? I think it's more like she knows that it's the right thing to do for kids.
I don't think he means spoilers. I think he means like trauma-inducing.
That's
visuals.
what I'm saying. I'm saying that maybe we should have a broader discussion about the things that we show kids. And now I'm like, well, maybe I shouldn't show my kids Star Wars until much later because a doctorate in child psychology thinks it's not a good idea.
Yeah, because you were planning to show your kids at like age 4 or something, right? Or
I mean, I
something.
haven't decided yet, but I was trying to do it at a time where, they would actually understand it. But now
I will say, by the
feel
way, a good pre-Star Wars is Avatar: The Last Airbender. I know a ton of people with young kids, and that is the thing, because it's a very similar sort of like epic hero's journey with a big sweeping scope. And that's a good way to get kids into what could eventually be Star Wars. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say Avatar, the James Cameron movie, which would also be a good one.
No, I would never recommend that movie.
Anyway, JD says at the end here, I hope this puts your mind at ease about showing them Toy Story 2, which is a masterpiece of a movie. So,
Yes.
Jeff...
that's not. Now it puts my mind the opposite of at ease for showing my kids anything because the doctorate in child psychology, maybe I would love a follow-up email from your wife saying, here's what I think is probably the right time to show kids stuff. I would be very
JD, if you're listening to this, which I guess he's several weeks behind, so he's not going to hear this until end of September. But JD, when you listen to this,
it's only my child's life that's at stake. So take your time,
it's only
JD.
Jeff's kids' psychological development at stake here. Please ask your wife to let us know when is the appropriate time to show your children Star Wars.
Yes.
And Jeff will probably take it more seriously than he should.
I will take it as gospel.
Yep. Nothing could go wrong with
because you said your wife's an expert.
Yeah.
And Dave read an email that I never saw.
Yeah.
So
I read that in a parenting book. Well, I heard that on a podcast that talked about a parenting book, so that sounds legit.
Yeah, totally. Okay, well, those are all the emails or some of the emails you've been writing into us at /filmcast@gmail.com. Keep them coming in. Let's get to what we've been watching this week. Christy, you've been watching a few things. You saw The Dead Don't Die, which is a movie that our guest last week spoke about. Lindsay Romaine saw that movie twice. I've been seeing a lot of polarized reactions to this movie. Some people are like, this thing's amazing. Some people are like, this is extremely boring and disdainful of horror or the zombie movie genre. What do you think about The Dead Don't Die?
I love The Dead Don't Die. I love zombie movies. I love Romero. I think that this is a really smart iteration. I'm honestly astonished by people that are bored by it. I am astonished when people say that. I have a friend who I love deeply and who knows a lot about horror movies. I will say way more than I do. But he said he feels like the movie shows no understanding of zombie movies. And I was like, one, the references to Romero movies alone, I think, counter that. But two, I'm like the messaging within the film is so much about like Romero's style, where it's the use of the zombies metaphorically and the use of the setting. Like, I just... like 10 minutes in, I just thought it's one of those movies that to me felt like Jim Jarmusch made it specifically for me, which I super appreciated. Because like between this and like Only Lovers Left Alive, like we have a thing going on. Like, I don't know,
I wanted this to be a lot like Only Lovers Left Alive, which is a movie I adore so much,
Sure.
even though it's so strange and hard to recommend, right?
Well, they're totally different movies, but they're both movies that when I watched, I was like, oh, this feels like very specifically made to my interest. And like what I like so much about The Dead Don't Die is it is a observational comedy in a very Jarmusch style set against the zombie apocalypse. And it's also set in like small town Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up. So like, which is 100% references to Romero stuff. Like most of his stuff was set in Pennsylvania. It was specifically shot in Pennsylvania. But it's also like just a certain way of talking and interacting with each other. And it's just all these things about this kind of, I mean, the movie is in some way about the tedium of small town life. But that is to an end. And it's like, it's laughing at the characters a little bit, but not in a way that feels like it's making them yokels or anything. It's just laughing at kind of humanity where like, you're literally talking about the end of the world here. And these people are casually standing around and like having like discussions about the weird mortician down the street and stuff. And you're just like, where are your priorities? But it's like, that's also just what you see going on now. Like people are genuinely afraid the world is ending. And then we're like, oh my God, did you guys see what they said on The Bachelor? And like, I don't mean to like slant The Bachelor specifically because it's about a million things. Like, I just talked for a rant about like, a Twitter account that doesn't exist anymore. And like in the grand scheme of things, who cares? But that's exactly what The Dead Don't Die is about. is about all these things that like allow us to be zombies to the things that are really going on. So yeah, I love it. I watched it. I had the good fortune of watching it with Kimber Myers, who is another film critic. She's really wonderful. You should find her on Twitter. She's super fun. But we were like genuinely cackling the whole way through the movie, and well, until the finale, because the finale is like he's done with his jokes in the finale. But like I think that Jim Jarmusch has a lot to say with this film. I think that the performances are really exciting. I think part of the trouble might be that it is trying to sell itself like a zombie comedy like Shaun of the Dead or Zombieland, and it's not that kind of comedy. It's not slapstick. It's not broad. It's much wrier. It's much more about conversation and the kind of quirks of how people talk to each other. And yeah, I don't know. For me, it really struck something. Like there's a part where, which I think is indicative of the humor. There's a part where Bill Murray's character, who he's upset because he is stuck spending the night next to the local drunk has recently died, and they don't have a place to store her for the night, so she's in like a holding cell. And he says something like, "Oh God, even dead you'd reek of Chardonnay, Marlene, or whatever." And it's like just little stuff like that, where like if that makes you chuckle, you will probably like this movie. If you're just kind of like, okay, whatever, then fine. And I think there's a lot of space for what horror gets to be and what doesn't get to be. What The Dead Don't Die chooses not to be is scary. It's not a scary film. It's very gross. There's a lot of graphic violence, but like it's not being used to an end to like scare you. It's not a thrilling movie. It's purposely very kind of, I mean, it's a Jim Jarmusch movie. It's a stroll through the end of the world.
All right. Well, glad to hear you liked it. I think I'll have to check it out now with two recommendations on the podcast. That's The Dead Don't Die. It's out in theaters right now. What else have you been watching, Christy?
I got to go to the first screening of Midsummer, which was super exciting.
I'm so jealous.
The new,
you and everybody in that Alamo Draft House.
Right,
Come on.
The new Ari Aster film, which is coming out in a couple weeks.
Yeah, and I'll be very cryptic. But yeah, he made Hereditary last year, and Hereditary was one of my favorite films of the year, and I loved how he takes horror expectations and plays with them, but also how he takes deeply personal stories and explores them through horror. And I
feel kind of bad for this guy's therapist, by the way. Like, what does that therapist have to deal with? Because this guy is putting it all out in his movie.
No, but because have you ever seen Cronenberg like talk to people? He seems like the chillest dude in the world, and like Ari's like not that level of like chill yet, but like Cronenberg seems like a super well-adjusted person if you just chat with him. But it's because they work out their demons elsewhere.
There is the weird historic, like there's a thing that he's not revealed yet, like what kind of inspired Hereditary, right? Like the family experience he's gone through.
I don't think that's ours to know. But he has spoken more broadly about how his fear. He began to fear that what if we are basically doomed to live the lives of what if our DNA dooms us to whatever? Yeah. What if we can never escape the things about our family we don't like in ourselves? You know what I mean? And I feel like that's what Hereditary is about. This is also a personal story. If you want to know specifically the broad strokes, I go into it in my review at Riot Material. But Dave has very gently requested for me to not give plot details. So I won't say what he said before the movie started at the Alamo. Even me, I was like, I'm not spoiler averse.
This movie seems sunny, right? How could it be scary or horror?
What's so great.
Right?
So it's, again, like The Dead Don't Die, this is a different kind of horror. I do think it is scary, but it's not like Hereditary. I genuinely had like a panic attack at Hereditary. Like I was actually gagging the first time I saw that movie, and I couldn't sleep until like 5 a.m. Midsummer didn't have that effect on me. Midsummer actually made me feel great. It, cleared up my acne and all that kind of stuff. Like I feel like it made me a happier, jollier person by the end. Maybe it's the sunshine. Maybe I just need to go to Sweden need a creepy cult. But no, I think Midsummer's it's interesting. And again, I go into my review and I'm trying to be careful so as not to spoil the experience, but it is similar to Hereditary in kind of like themes and some structural elements, but it is a very different kind of horror. For one thing, most of it is set during the daytime. They're not like hiding a lot, though I would say don't watch spoiler or trailers because there are some things that I would not want to know in advance that are being played in trailers now. But like it is mostly set in the daytime, and the people are super cheery and it's what I like about it is that it is about a kind of horror that is not so explicit. and it was really fun to watch it. It's actually kind of funny, but again, like I feel like people are going to misunderstand because critics came out being like it's hilarious, and I'm like I want to say like it's like critics' version of hilarious, which is a different thing. We're kind of so excited because we didn't expect it to be funny at all, and it is funny, but it's not like
Right.
you're not going to go see Trainwreck or Ghostbusters. It's not that kind of thing. And I wouldn't call it a horror comedy. That's not what it's doing. But there is a observational humor in it. And it's funny because there was like a couple sitting next to me that I didn't know. And for like the first 30 minutes of the movie before they've like actually kind of like gotten into anything too harrowing, they just kept kind of clucking at each other like, yeah, I agree. And it was just really kind of funny. But like, yeah, I really love Midsummer. I think it will probably be among my favorites of the year because it's just it was both what I wanted and not what I expected, if that makes any sense. So highly recommending Midsummer. It comes out soon. And if you want more details, it's in my review for Riot Material. And I don't go very heavy into spoilers, but there's some implications about what happens in it toward the end. So if you don't want to know that, just skip the last paragraph.
I am very excited about that film. Midsummer will be out in a few weeks in theaters. And Christy, you're also working on a series for, I want to say, Pajaba.com, is that right?
Well, no, this is not a series. I'm going to be doing. I may miscommunicated, but I'm doing a list coming up for to celebrate Pride Month. I know Pride Month's almost over. It's been kind of a hectic month, but I love horror movies, and I am an LGBTQ person, so I wanted to do a thing combining those two things. So I'm doing a list on kind of what I think are the best LGBTQ movies, and it's been a really fun thing to put together because, like, when I pitched it, I had a very specific list in mind, and then I was like, I should really do my due diligence, so I tweeted out like, hey, what's your favorite queer horror movie? And like the responses I got were so all over the place that it was a real challenge. And I basically just kept kind of like putting off actually like finishing my list because I kept wanting to like see more things that people were getting excited about. So I wanted to talk briefly about two of the things that are going to be on the list. And then you can look for it on Sci-Fi probably later this week. The completed list of the things that I think you should see if you love horror and if you want to see how horror has chosen to represent queer people for better, in some cases for worse, over its history. But I, for the first time ever, saw The Hunger. And I'm mad at myself that I haven't seen it sooner. I feel like the reason I didn't was because when people talked about The Hunger, I took their conversation about it to mean it was going to be some kind of like heightened, like arty horror that wasn't going to speak to me personally. But like it's Tony Scott's first movie, which like Tony Scott who did like Top Gun and Domino and like a bunch of super macho movies. I don't know if you consider Domino macho. That was just for some reason the first movie that popped into my head.
I don't think anyone has referenced Domino in the past decade. So congratulations, Christy.
Here's the dark detail of why Domino is forever in my head is because that I went to LA for the first time and I went and actually visited Tony Scott's grave because there's like this cemetery where you can walk around and kind of take everything in. And he's buried really close to Anton Yelchin actually. But his filmography is on the grave. And I remember just being like Domino, and it was just like for some reason that's burned. Now it's etched in my brain. Is that Tony Scott directed Domino. Anyway,
I feel like a lot of directors won't want to do that, but that's fascinating to hear about.
It's literally every movie. I was like, it wasn't even like selected highlights. It was like, nope, everyone.
With the Rotten Tomato scores right beside them.
Right. Sure. But so Tony Scott, this was he had been directing like commercials and stuff, and he decided he was going to make his first movie, and it is like a vampire movie starring Catherine Deneuve, David Bowie, and Susan Sarandon about like bisexual vampires who are like,
all right.
It's just, I mean, that's all you need to know, right? I don't know. We're 10 minutes into the movie and it was like just ferociously erotic. It was made in 1983. So there's like a lot going on at the time. And like, it's Bowie who has like been kind of this like queer icon for a while at this point. And like, Catherine Deneuve, who just does all kinds of really taboo smashing cinema. And then Susan Sarandon, I think this would have been after Rocky Horror, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's just like they all collide into this movie that the plot is like, I did like while watching it, read the Wikipedia entry because I was like, am I following this? And like, also I watched it while I had some wine. So I was like, maybe I'm not following this, but I understood it. It was just that I was like, oh no, this is a real weird plot. because it involves like progeria studies and like monkeys. It's whatever. There's a lot going on in it. But like The Hunger was, what I was really moved by was that there is such a textured sensuality to this film, and it gets tricky because it's another one of those movies that paints like bisexuality as like an inherent danger, as like, you know, bisexuals as like ravenous or whatever. But if anybody is gonna portray my people as a ravenous bisexual, I want it to be Catherine Deneuve and Susan Sarandon and David Bowie. Like, fine, go for it. But no, I genuinely was really struck by how like beautiful and how very 80s it is. Like, there's a lot of like gauzy drapes blowing around, and like Susan Sarandon, you can tell she's a serious scientist because she has a short haircut. And like there's just some fabulous fashion moments, and it's so terrific. It's I rented it on Amazon Prime. So it's pretty readily available to find. But yeah, highly recommend The Hunger. Have you guys seen The Hunger?
Have not. Yeah.
No, that's been like one of those Netflix movies that has been in my queue, I think, forever. When it's been around, I just never got around to it. Yeah.
I kept assuming I wouldn't be in the mood for it, and I was like, well, now's the moment. And I was like, oh my God, I would be in the mood for this so much of the time. What was I doing? But I feel like if you like Only Lovers, like, you'll like this. They're just like, there's just a certain kind of sensuality to it. Only Lovers is like definitely more like chill, but I feel like this had to have been an inspiration. There's just so much going on in this that feels like a precursor. And then the other one I watched because a colleague of mine at Sci-Fi Wire wrote a piece on Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, which is a movie I've avoided because I thought it sounded very silly. And when people talked about how it was gay, I thought, oh, I just don't know that I like need that. Like, I felt like it sounded inherently kind of offensive and annoying, and like it was going to be like being gay is this horrible thing, like being taken over by a serial killer, which is 100% like what the plot is. But also that kind of makes sense because Return to the Repressed is a thing that happens in horror, and sexuality is often demonized in horror. It's just that this time it's explicitly the sexuality of a teen boy instead of a teen girl who's being chased and, you know, targeted because how dare she have a sexual urge. So it's problematic. It is. But it was really fun to watch and real wild because I was just kind of like, how did they get away with making this movie? Like, there's so many close-ups of like male parts. Like, specifically, like there's like a close-up where like he's dancing around and just thrusting his crotch, and you're like, what is happening in this movie? Like, there's a dance number in the middle of this movie. Okay. And then there's like a scene where another kid, like, which I was not a boy in gym class, so I don't know how this works, but like one boy pulls down another boy's like sweatpants and he's only wearing a jockstrap, so now everyone gets to see his ass. And I was like, do boys not wear? Which I'm not asking you guys to explain.
Boys do not typically wear jockstraps in gym class. That is
that's
like, a very specialized thing.
Would you not want to wear an underwear over that? It feels like.
Let me tell you. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
It is like Superman's underwear. It goes over your underwear, but
oh, okay. So then, but it would make sense that he would have both on and not just be like bare ass under his sweatpants.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he's not in this movie, so spoilers for that. But it's like beyond just the idea that there seems to be a male on male gaze, which is pretty rare in horror. It's also like the whole thing is about this guy who cannot like. The whole, like, the plot of the movie is that, like, his girlfriend wants to have sex with him and he doesn't know how to deal. And, like, you know. Right. And some people have. Right. Yeah. And some people have read the ending to be, like, in supporting heteronormativity, but it could also be read potentially as, like, a bisexual allegory. But I was really pleasantly surprised by just how weird and fun this was to watch because, like, some of the Freddy movies to me are just not my favorite kind of slasher. But yeah, Courtney.
It's the bad places. I feel like they turn Freddy into like the joke, right? And it's not until like Nightmare where they kind of bring it back around. I love 1. 2 is a movie that I've always found kind of silly, but I'm definitely up for revisiting. 3 is genuinely great though. I love Dream Warriors.
They're kind of like a big blur in my head because like I watched a lot of those being introduced by like teens that like I was too young to be watching a lot of those movies, which might also be why like my initial reaction to them is like, no, thank you. Because I like slashers, but the Freddy stuff felt very kind of something. And that's not like a judgment call on them because I haven't watched most of them in a long time and I had never seen this one. So mostly it was just really fun to kind of confront my own like bullshit on why I had ducked certain movies that are like considered such part of the canon in this area, and it was really fun to watch them. So those will be on the list. Those are maybe not surprising additions to the list, but I have some newer things and some less expected things on, and I'm really excited about this. I've put way more man hours into it than I probably should have, because like at a certain point you're like, you've seen enough, but I was just like, I kept just finding excuses to be like, just one more. So.
Well, that's the Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, and the list will be at sci-fi.com, right?
I'm terrible at this. Hold on one sec. We like, because it's Sci-Fi Wire. It is sci-fi.com. SYFY.com.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I nailed it.
Nailed it.
But that's what Christy's been watching. Divin, your Hardware, what have you been watching?
A couple of things. I want to preach the gospel of Neon Genesis Evangelion. And you might have heard a lot of hubbub about this series.
Yeah, it just hit Netflix, right? Yeah.
Just hit Netflix. Let me tell you, in my day, I had to rent VHS tapes of Neon Genesis Evangelion, which contained 2 30-minute episodes. And I was only able to like rent one per week. And that's how I saw this like 26 episode series when I was 12. Those tapes, by the way, were like what, over $30? Like VHS tapes were expensive back then, like $40 and plus. That was just a complete ripoff. But that was how I saw the series, and it changed my life forever. So this is one of my top 5 TV shows of all time. If you take one of my TV, like any of my recommendations from this year, make it this one. I think it's great. It's fantastic. I've been revisiting it, and it still holds up. And this is an anime series about teenagers who basically have to save the world from giant monsters by piloting giant robots. And if you've seen Pacific Rim, Guillermo del Toro took a lot of imagery and honestly a lot of concepts from the show. That whole scene of like, I think one of the Jaegers like punching directly into the wall or into the window is a shot straight up lifted from this. The whole idea of what was the term of syncing up? What they call it, drifting. That was one episode of Neon Genesis Evangelion, and Guillermo del Toro turned it into like the core concept of his movie. Like that's how influential this show is. And I will say, like describing it, teens saving the world from giant monsters probably sounds like a ton of different anime. I will say this one rises above so much else. Like this is a show that dives deep into its characters. It is a show about the psychological struggles of these teenagers being forced to do this, basically. And the show takes place in 2015 after a apocalyptic event like killed off half the world's population in 2000. So it's also really wild watching the show now, like after all our fears of the next millennium, and like of everything that would happen, it is wild to see like, oh, well, we are actually doing a pretty good job of killing off plenty of species on this planet. And there's a climate crisis that could eventually lead to our doom. It is fascinating seeing all this happen. I love the show because mainly because of the characters, but also because of its broad mythology. These are teenagers fighting these monsters called angels. And they're called angels for a reason. And the show really dives deep into like biblical like themes and plot. Basically, it dives into the Dead Sea Scrolls. And as a teenager who's super into like X-Files and like conspiracy theories and stuff, I just ate this up. I ate up everything about the show. I'm surprised it still holds up as much as it does. I think it's a really deep, fascinating show, even if you're not into anime. I would say this is one worth watching because it shows you the power of animation and basically just the way anime works as an art form. Like the show looks and feels like nothing else. Definitely worth a watch. And I'm just glad it's so easily accessible now, right? Like kids these days, they could just hit Netflix and hit play and they get this whole series. It's kind of amazing to me. This series has been out of print basically for the past 10 years too. So you haven't even been able to like get it on DVD. The DVDs have been over $200 on Amazon for the past 10 years. So this has been a hard to get thing. That's why it's such a big deal that's on Netflix. And I'm really digging it. I love the easy accessibility. I love that there's a whole conversation restarting around the show and what it means, because I think it was one of the first anime series to really dive deep into some of these concepts. It's psychologically rich. It really concerns itself with like, the like depression and serious issues that these teenagers are going through, their relationships with their families. Like it's all, I think for like a kind of misanthropic teen like I was, like it all kind of worked very well. But now looking at it, like I see even more to read from both the teen stories and the adults and kind of what they went through. It is so much a show about generational trauma. And yeah, the expectations that teenagers have too. Like what I love about anime, especially like this, when you're a teenager, right, everything seems like it's the end of the world. You know, this one person isn't your friend, or you didn't get to go out with this one person, you were rejected, and all of a sudden the world is ending. I love that the show just always kind of made that all very literal. And it's a fun thing too to see today, because this was I think one of the first things where fans revolted when the show ended. Like it ends in a really controversial way, I'd say, because they kind of ran out of money. By the final few episodes, some of the plot had to be delivered through like stills and just text on the screen, and it got kind of wild and crazy. And fans started sending death threats to the director and to the other people working on the show. And
wow.
Yeah, death threats in the mid 90s, like fandom got really toxic. This was when the internet was just like bubbling up. So there was internet fandom there. Like I was all in on mid 90s Evangelion fandom.
Man,
like that was
I
a
cannot
glorious
imagine
time.
a time when the internet was toxic with its fandom.
Indeed. But the thing is, like, he did a sequel movie, The End of Evangelion, which is also on Netflix too. So once you finish the series, you could go watch that, which kind of rewrites the ending of the show. But he also he like breaks the fourth wall. Hideaki Anno, the director, he puts footage of the actual death threats on the screen into the movie, and then put like
Wow.
cameras into theaters of people watching early screenings of the film. So randomly throughout the film, like you just see shots of the inside of Japanese theaters of just the audience watching this thing. So you're watching this movie, watching these people watching this thing, and oh man, it's this show is wild. And Christy, I think of all people, I would love for you to take a look at it. I think
What is the thing that people are mad about the music though? That's the thing I keep seeing.
There are some music changes. I think one of the things the show one of the calling cards of the show for some reason was that at the end of every episode there was like a karaoke version of Fly Me to the Moon, and that just became kind of like the thing. It was just like a little cute thing the show did. The music all around is awesome, by the way. Like just one of the best scores I've ever heard in any TV show or movie. But yeah, they didn't get the rights to Fly Me to the Moon. Like Netflix paid for everything but Fly Me to the Moon. And I think it's not the biggest deal in the world, but it does remind me of things like when Daria finally showed back up on
that's
stuff,
honestly, it's so dumb, but that's what like held me back. As I said to my husband this weekend, I was like, "Oh, the show's on," and I hear all the people are into it. But like,
yeah,
okay.
You should watch it. Despite
now that I know, but it made me think of Dario when I bought the box set, and then I was like, "These songs are wrong."
It's not as disappointing as that. It's not as disappointing as losing all the background music from Daria. My God, heart broke with that.
Yeah.
Do you also see this thing about like the queer erasure going on? Like that there was one of the relationships between the two male characters.
There's a really, really bad translation, I think. So it certainly it can feel like queer erasure because not a huge spoiler, but the show deals with the main character who's a teen boy, not very confident in himself and who he is as a person, and explores his sexuality. And kind of it delves into his queerness. And I think one of the most compelling aspects of the show is how it did that. And the translation kind of waters it down a little. So I don't know if it's just the translator doing that. Maybe they didn't realize like the impact of those words. Like it sounds
like it actually, I did a little reading. It sounds like it was like almost intentional to make it more ambiguous.
I've noticed some, like having watched the original, subtitles for the past 20 years. My God, some of these lines are ingrained in my head, and I've seen little all around. Like it's just, I don't know if they understood the full impact of that, or it feels like they're taking some more flourishes with the translation this time around. But the original translation was one character telling Shinji, "I love you," and in this translation, it's "I like you." And the word can be described in both ways, so it's It's tough. It's tough. Yeah.
Well, that's Neon. That's Neon Genesis Evangelion, and despite how do you pronounce it, by the way? Evangelion.
I mean, I think in English they always say Evangelion, but I think in the show sometimes they even say Evangelion, and it's confusing. Whatever, just watch it. Just watch it. Prepare for your mind to be blown. This show taught me filmmaking. This show made me pay attention to the way shots were composed and the way editing happens and how that tells a story. It is so good. It is so good. It's a seminal work of art. So I'm just really glad that everybody can access it so easily now, and not like I did, like picking up a VHS after karate practice once a week. It was rough.
Yeah, at a time when you had much less disposable income than you do now.
Yeah, it was really hard. Yeah, luckily in Hartford, Connecticut, I had a little comic store called the Dragon's Den, and for some reason they were cool enough to like have a little anime library and rent out tapes at like $2 a pop. So that was pretty great back then. And that was my life savior, basically.
You're making me nostalgia for like the Tower Records on 68th, that the basement was just all rentals.
I love Tower Records, man.
I lost hours in that store. It was the best.
It was good. Even Tom Hanks' son. This is something we don't reflect on enough. Tom Hanks' son made a documentary about how awesome Tower Records is. That is a true fact about this world. Anyway, Devindra, what else have you been watching?
Watch Evangelion. That's the main takeaway here.
Okay, so you're skipping the rest of what we've been watching now.
Yeah, just do that. I also saw Shadow, Zhang Yimou's latest film, which he hasn't done. Like, I think he's done several action films, and then he's kind of what was the last one? The Great Wall, right? That was him. He's a strange filmmaker to me because I feel like I remember his early stuff back in the day, like some of his earlier films. I'm thinking, is that like Raise the Red Lantern? I think that was him. Yeah, that was 1991. He was making these really interesting period Chinese films, and then like I think post Crouching Tiger, he's like, I'm gonna do my wuxia film, and he made Hero, which I think is one of the most like glorious, epic martial arts films ever made. Thanks to the full support of the government of China, basically, like make that thing happen, and certainly to change the ending of that movie. But that movie is glorious to watch. I think it's a seminal work. I don't think Shadow is up to that level, but honestly, I don't think any of his other martial arts films have been either. House of Flying Daggers is a gorgeous movie, has a great like core relationship. I never really loved that movie. I saw Curse of the Golden Flower, which is it was like I think it was a Shakespeare retelling with Chow Yun-fat, and beautiful movie that just felt completely empty. Shadow deals mostly in court intrigue, so in some ways it feels like several episodes of Game of Thrones kind of boiled down into I don't know, 2 hours, and I'd say a lot of the intrigue I don't really care that much about, but I find the characters really interesting, and it builds to this action set piece that I think is fantastic. It's certainly unique and something we've never really seen before. I have 2 words for you folks: umbrella blades.
I'm excited. I'm on board.
Blades, like that's it. It's also.
I feel like these reviews are meant to hook me specifically. Also,
oh man,
you and Jim Jarmusch. It's not okay, Devindra.
Just having this movie does kind of feel like a Jim Jarmusch take on like ancient Chinese court intrigue in a way. So meandering, so like confusing, seemingly on purpose. The other great thing about this film is that it looks astounding. It is monochrome to the point of being practically black and white, which is first of all astounding to see from Zhang Yimou, because this is a guy who he just lives color. Like his films are usually so bold and so dynamic and colorful, especially like Hero. Even House of Flying Daggers, like the greens in those movies, the colors of the leaves flowing in Hero were so bold. It's fascinating to see him be a little more subdued here, and some backdrops even seem like they're watercolor animation. So it's a really unique looking film. I'm glad to see him kind of experimenting again. Kind of makes me want to go see The Great Wall, which I didn't see just because it looked kind of dull, and it wasn't even for the Matt Damon reasons. It's just like I just wasn't really into that. I'm glad he's coming back around and doing these sorts of things, because I think for the longest while too, like he was basically like China's state director. You know, he was like the guy they called on to like direct was it the Olympics? Did the Beijing Olympics opening, which is one of the most terrifying displays of human power I've seen in a very long time. So yeah, I love that he's back in this. This is a great movie. Unfortunately, I don't think the movie is playing in many places. It's only at the IFC Center in New York.
It was out in limited release a while ago, actually.
Okay.
So, and it will be out on Blu-ray, I believe, later this summer. So,
Yeah.
I pre-ordered the 4K UHD Blu-ray. It looks like it'll be out on August 13th, so I'm looking forward to it.
Right. And yeah, get a big screen for that. If you're still in theaters near you, it's definitely worth checking out. I saw it kind of like half sleepy the other night, and that's actually the perfect dream state to see a movie like this, honestly.
All right, that's Shadow. And Devindra, I'm just gonna fast forward if that's cool. Unless you really wanted to speak about Los Spookies.
I mean, I do want to. Let me.
Okay,
just
go ahead.
All
right, Devindra. Wait, let me do it. All right, Devindra, what else have you been watching?
Just quickly, shout out to Los Spookies on HBO. I love the show. It's fantastic. It is, what was it, Fred Armisen and Julio Torres, who is a young comedian here in New York, and also a writer on SNL. I didn't realize he was there. I've been following his career for a while. This is a fun show about a group of friends in Mexico who are kind of goth, and they like to create spooky scenarios, like things to just freak people out. So it's sort of like Napoleon Dynamite in the sort of like weird humor meets like goth, basically, or like Wes Anderson meets goth. It is hilarious. The humor is dry as hell, but so much fun. And it's mostly in Spanish too, which is fun to see in like a mainstream HBO show. So definitely check that out. It's got my seal of approval.
All right, that's Los Spookies. It's on HBO. All right, I had some stuff I've been watching, but like I do want to get to our review of Toy Story 4, so we'll cover it next week. In the meantime, before we get to our review of Toy Story 4, we want to thank all the people who donated to the podcast this week. Thanks to Zachary Y. and Heather K. from Toronto, who writes the following with her donation. Heather K. writes, "Donating from Toronto for my friend's birthday. Max has always been there for me since we met more than 10 years ago. This is way too cheesy, but I'm sharing partially to embarrass him and also remind him how thankful I am for him. He was the one who encouraged me to get help at the worst of my depression 4 years ago and got me to speak to a professional, but also listened when I said I wanted to find more hobbies and things to do to get me out of the dark cloud, pushed me to sign up and train for my first 5K run, and knew about my love of movies, so suggested I listen to a podcast called the Slash Filmcast. I feel like you guys and Max have been there for me through all the steps of getting out of that dark time, so I'm grateful for this." That message comes in from Heather K. from Toronto. Heather, thank you so much for that kind message, and thank you also to Max.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks to Max for suggesting the podcast. Happy birthday to Max, and we really appreciate all of your donations. If you want to support what we do here on the podcast, you can go to paypal.me/filmcast. That's paypal.me/filmcast. You can also go to slashfilm.com, use the /filmcast tab, and use the PayPal links on the side of the page. Let's move on to our review of Toy Story 4. All right. Here we go. That was from the trailer for Toy Story 4. When a new toy called Forky joins Woody and the gang, a road trip alongside old and new friends reveals how big the world can be for a toy. This is the fourth series in this franchise. This one is directed by Josh Cooley. And, I think there were a lot of doubts about this film going into this weekend. I mean, Toy Story 3, which came out 9 years ago, really felt like it was a good ending for the franchise, right? It felt like, hey, that was a good, that was a solid conclusion to this franchise that's been with us for a really long time. And really nice job, Pixar. Really nice job wrapping it up thematically and giving us a satisfying ending. And so when I heard that there was a Toy Story 4, I felt like this would probably feel like a soulless cash grab. It would probably feel like, oh, hey, we're like extending this story past its natural life because we know that the Toy Stories can make a ton of money. And so my question for you, Christy, to start with is, does this movie feel like a soulless cash grab, or does it give us something new for the Toy Story franchise?
I mean, those things are not mutually exclusive. There are some aspects of this that very much feel aimed at money. However, I was one of the people that was not excited about Toy Story 4 because I I thought that they concluded really beautifully with 3, and I thought like, well, what more story is there to tell? And then I saw 4, and I was like, all right, well played, because this story is nuts. But also, when I rewatched the first 3 films, I realized how, and obviously, I don't think that they were always, this was always Endgame. I absolutely don't think so. However, I think that they did a really good job of looking back at what they had already created, and from the rumors about this, hobbled together a bunch of in development scripts for this sequel and made something that makes a lot of sense. And we can get more into this as we move in, but like the whole concept of Forky like might seem totally out of left field, but like his whole like the reoccurring discussion of trash and the reoccurring discussion of what happens to a toy when a child no longer wants it has occurred in every one of these movies, and it's taking us to new places within that storytelling and within that journey of Woody specifically. And I was really delighted by how the world expands in this film, and even some things that I was afraid I thought were going to be really pandering, because they're like, and Bo Peep's back and now she wears pants, and I was like, okay, I know that I'm supposed to be like, oh my god, yay girl power, because like, yeah. But I was nervous that it was going to be like Bo Peep is, shows up and gives lip service to feminism and talks about STEM for 25 seconds, and we're supposed to act like that's a character. But I think that they actually did a really good job of filling out these characters that they do bring to the new story and creating these worlds outside of what we know as like the safe little like suburban area that is Toy Story's normal terrain. And I was really delighted and surprised.
All right. Well, it sounds like you enjoyed it. How about you, Devindra?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it as well. I mean, it certainly still feels like, man, wouldn't it be great if we just made another Toy Story movie? Like, I don't think the need for this movie always felt like it was there, but it is astounding to me. Like, what, Toy Story 2 came out in 1999. Toy Story 3 came out, nine years ago, right? 2010. And now, 9 years later, we have this one. So as far as cash grabs go, I feel like, especially Disney, right? They've been far more aggressive around things like maybe Star Wars that they want to sell up immediately. So I love that they've taken their time with the series. I really enjoyed this movie, but I'll admit I'm not like a huge Toy Story fan. And I know a lot of people like grew up with these movies. I just didn't, it was not really in the repertoire of things I was really watching. I like them and I respect them quite a bit. And Toy Story 3 I thought was a really good ending. I think this one, it adds some great new things. I don't feel like it's entirely groundbreaking, but it still managed to make me cry a few times. Mostly things. Oh man, there's a scene early on with the main kid in this movie just alone in a kindergarten class, and it certainly made me tear up. Just because like I can imagine my daughter going through that and how scary and sad that whole situation is going to be for everybody. So yeah, you got me there, Toy Story. Thanks a lot.
Jeff,
hit you right in the baby.
Yep.
Jeff Kanata, what are your thoughts on Toy Story 4?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say my thoughts about Toy Story 4 are best summed up in the form of a limerick.
How appropriate.
Yeah. Every Toy Story has been really good, but a fourth one wasn't sure that they should. But it's smart what they did. It's not even for kids. This Toy Story is about parenthood.
Nice. Pretty good. Pretty good. Pretty good.
I
Jeff.
really like how these movies taken as a group, taken as a series, are kind of about the process of growing up, right? They are about, 3 is very much about moving beyond our toys, moving into late adolescence / young adulthood, and the toys having to deal with that. But it really is a reflection on it. What's so emotional about Toy Story 3 for me is that remembering the joys of youth and time passing and realizing that you leave those things behind, right? And each step of this journey in this series has been that. And this one really does feel to me like it's a story about Woody being a parent. And not only to the human children, the human child that he feels so connected to, but to Forky as well, who behaves very much like, I'm sure, Devindra, you can relate, babies want to kill themselves real bad. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know. I honestly, I don't know how we survived as a species, because babies try to kill themselves so often.
That was our evolutionary parenting bond, basically. Like, you can't just abandon this thing. You gotta take care of it for a little while, unlike most other animals. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This thing wants to die. It wants real bad. And I think that Forky trying to be trash is very much evocative of that point. It's a beautiful movie. I really like it. It's odd though, and I think you guys were speaking to this point, and I maybe felt some of the things you guys were feeling for a very specific reason. I don't know if it resonates with you guys, but there are movies like this, and Toy Story 4 is one, where the entire movie takes place as we're headed somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole thing feels like, okay, well, we just got to get past this to get to where we're actually going.
Mm-hmm.
But no, that's the whole movie. The whole movie is a detour, not to the destination. Like, the whole family gets in the car and goes to a place, but they don't get there. They get to this pit stop along the way, and the entire movie takes place at the pit stop.
Right.
So it feels very unsatisfying because we never get to the actual place. And so it feels like this is just a side story on our way to the real story. But no, this is the real story.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that a bit, I don't know, there's something about that when movies do that feels a little unsatisfying, and it feels like it doesn't have the full weight of a real tale, real story. But the ending of this movie, they land in such a great place that it does feel like a potential conclusion to this series. Although 3 felt like that too, so who knows? But overall, I think it's as Pixar seems capable and wanting to do every time, it's showing off what they're capable of doing purely on a technical level with CG. I mean, there's a scene early on that takes place in the rain, almost only to show off how awesome they can make rain look now. It's incredible. And then there's like another scene at a sandbox where all the grains of sand are individually rendered. It's man. Wow. I mean, Toy Story 1 to this is just a massive leap.
It is kind of hard to watch Toy Story 1 at this point.
Yeah.
It's tough.
But you remember, like, when PlayStation 3 was coming out, they were like, we'll have Toy Story level graphics. It was like the end all be all of what it could
Toy Story 1 previs. That's what we really need.
Yeah.
I think you can see the difference most clearly if you compare the dog in Toy Story 1 with the cat in Toy Story 4.
Oh, the cat in Toy Story 4 looks photorealistic.
Mm-hmm. Photorealistic. And Scud in Toy Story 1
hold up.
does not hold up. Does not even have fur, basically. So yeah, I mean, it's come a long, long way since Toy Story 1. But yeah, Jeff, you're about to finish, right?
No, yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed the movie, and I think it's weird to have a 4-movie, trilogies seem to be the order of the day, but this while it did feel a little weird and not a full tale, the place that it lands is very satisfying, and they managed to make these into beautiful movies every time, and ones that make you reflect on your own life. I'm a big fan of this series overall.
Yeah, I'll say I really enjoyed myself at Toy Story 4. It did not feel like a cash grab. I thought it was very clever for them to bring back Bo Peep, and what they did with that character felt right to me. Like, it felt, or not right, but it felt like a feasible version of what could have happened. Because if you remember from Toy Story 3, I think Woody makes an oblique reference to like all the friends they've lost along the way, of which Bo Peep is one. And so you there was always this blank about like whatever happened to that character, and I love that this movie kind of filled that in an interesting way. And yeah, I had a great time at the theater. I cried a little bit. I agree with Jeff. I don't know why more people. I feel like not enough people are talking about the fact that it is very clearly a parenting allegory, in my opinion.
Very clearly, the whole thing of Forky being asked to be picked up, everything Woody is doing is very clearly shepherding this child. I loved his shocked awakening into existence which feels like a terrifying thing for a
Mhm.
children's movie, but it is the whole birthing process. And then Woody pulls him out of a bag.
Yeah.
Like it's
Eh.
it's a birthing experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw this piece by Jen Chaney over at Vulture about how this movie is about like baby boomers and like how baby boomers need to learn to get out of the way and let the new generation take over, and like that's Woody's role. And I was just like, whoa, like people are reading, like have readings in this that I just didn't even conceive of. I mean, yes, it is very much about like getting out of the way, but it really felt like about parenthood, because Woody gives this whole speech towards the beginning of the film about how like kids, they grow up and they do all these things that you don't even see and don't even understand anymore, and it's like it's about like Woody's journey of letting go, right? That's what this
It's
Toy
it's
Story
what
4
every
is about.
parent realizes, is that your life is over. Your function is now to provide a starting runway for this new life to
Right.
begin, and
Yeah.
and that's really
No-
what Woody realizes.
The final movie will just be all those like fake animals they have in retirement homes and how they like soothe the seniors before they die.
I think-
that's Toy
I
Story
think-
5.
I think Toy Story 5 is Buzz Lightyear living the bachelor life and like just loving the fact that he has no entanglements, no significant other. He's just like Buzz out
Totally
in the world.
free because there's nobody left because humanity has died.
Yeah.
Like
I will
it-
say that
it's-
was a disappointment in this movie for me, is that like I felt like they just completely flushed that Buzz Lightyear character down the toilet, metaphorically, like
yeah.
in the
feel
sense
like
that
Disney just wanted to distance themselves from
Tim
Tim Allen.
Allen.
It felt like he was like, you're right. I felt it. I felt this feeling that Buzz is a side character.
he is persona non grata in this
Yeah.
franchise, because I thought they had made him into like a relatively intelligent, noble character in Toy Story 2 and 3, and he is a moron in this film. Like
He also
I
has
mean,
very
well-
little to do. He
Yeah.
doesn't do anything.
yeah.
But if you look back at Toy Story 2 and 3, they give him gimmick stuff to do. Like I
Yeah,
don't think
yeah.
that Buzz has a lot of range. I mean, like in 2, that's when they have a second Buzz who is like demo mode Buzz 2 to like do all the fun stuff, including the Star Wars reference. So because like other Buzz can't do all that silly fun stuff if he's actually on mission. And then in Toy Story 3, they set him back to demo mode, and then they turn him into Spanish Buzz. And like, it's like it's we don't get to like, it's not really about Buzz's evolution. Was the first movie. Buzz hasn't really evolved much since then. Like Buzz is happy to be a toy, happy to be friends with Woody. Jesse's pretty cool. Like he doesn't have a lot of growth to do. So I think it's really smart they sidelined him, especially because this movie isn't about him and Woody.
Mhm.
It's about Woody having to accept a new stage of life. And
Yeah.
I totally get now where all this parenting stuff comes from, but you guys are like, it's about parenting. And I was like, what? Like, I didn't, I mean, and maybe it's because I'm not a parent. I didn't watch it with that like experience being brought to it. But like, I was really amazed at how, to me, the film felt so much about when you feel like your control of your life is spiraling out of your grasp. And like Woody basically Woody clings to Forky not because he is his parent. I mean, him and Bonnie created her like Forky together, like Frankenstein style, which I love that like Forky is a whole Frankenstein narrative, like ate that up. But like that Woody basically like clings to him so that he has a role in the playroom because he's not being played with anymore and he's not
Mhm.
ready to like be cast aside with the toddler toys. And like, I really liked how this became about kind of realizing, that's why I think the boomer argument makes sense to me,
Mhm.
but also just the idea about like that there are points in your life where you have to acknowledge that a chapter is closing. Like being with Bonnie is not what being with Andy was for him. And even if Bonnie got to the point where like Andy, she's like, oh, I might take this toy to college. Like, then what? I mean, but like there's always going to be a change for Woody. And what I liked was as perfect as I felt Toy Story 3's ending was, when I watched it again under the context of having seen Toy Story 4, I was like, oh, that actually doesn't answer the question though. Like this answers the question of like, what if Woody's worst fear that he is rejected, he is trash, what if that happens? What if he loses everything that he associates with being his identity? Like, then what? And I really loved how it talked about the freedom of that, because I think it does speak to people on a lot of levels. And I feel like Bo is a really good representative of that, where like, Bo, when he says, oh my God, you're a lost toy. And like, he says it like it's, a 4-letter word. And she's like, yeah, I'm a lost toy. And like, honestly, and I was kind of teasing somebody because of a miscommunication in a Slack earlier, where like I was talking about Pride Day stuff and somebody else was talking about Toy Story, and like the messages came at a weird moment. And someone was like, wait, so are we saying Toy Story 4 is a LGBTQ narrative? And I was like, I mean, Bo does have an alternative lifestyle, according to Woody. And I'm like, again, it's like that can be seen as stretching, and it's literally something I thought about an hour ago and was like, I mean, that actually kind of plays. And like, but that's what I like so much about this movie is I think they thought a lot about how to tell a story that can speak to a lot of things, because it's ultimately about choosing new chapters in your life and being exposed to your fears and like all these things. And like, I just really love the moment where Forky looks at Woody and says like, oh, we're both trash. And like, that is the thing that Woody fears so much. And I think that there's something really powerful about somebody saying the thing you're afraid is true and then being like, I'm okay still. Like the thing I'm afraid of happened and I'm okay still. And I thought that it was a really powerful journey to watch Woody become the thing that he has been afraid of being since he fell out the window in Toy Story 1.
Let me ask you this. I have seen all these tweets being like, "Oh my gosh, Forky is amazing. I love Forky so much." And I'm just like, I just don't get it. I mean, yes, it's like an adorable character design, and it's like a very DIY aesthetic. And of course,
it seems purposefully bad too. Like when I first saw that character design, I was like, "Are they trolling us? Are they like we just ran out of ideas? Here's a sentient fork.
Here's a
eat
spork.
it up.
You're still gonna buy it for your kids at $20 a pop."
Yeah.
It's very
Forky
Mr.
is
Bill
an actual
to me.
toy.
Yeah.
It is $20.
What is Mr. Bill?
Oh no, Mr. Bill!
Oh yeah.
Am I the only one old enough to know Mr. Bill? Okay.
Yeah.
That's old Saturday Night Live, the
It's
Eddie
like
Murphy, Joe Piscopo years.
It's like a cruder version of Mr. Bill. And I guess my question is, like, do you get it? Like, because for me, that is one of the, like, yes, it's cute character design. Tony Hale does a great job voicing him, but it is one of the least interesting characters of this film
Dave,
for me. Yes.
Are you asking if we're cool?
Yeah, I'm asking if you are cool like the rest of the kids. That's correct.
I love Forky. I thought I would hate Forky. I hated the initial teaser where they're like, here's all the toys you know, and then here's this weird spork that we're calling Forky for reasons, which in the movie it makes sense to me, but like when they announced that, I was like, I know this is a dumb thing to get hung up on, but why? And like, whatever. But what I liked about it
it's almost like a kid made it. Yeah.
Right. And I liked a lot about Forky as the story unfolds. First off, I do like the Frankenstein narrative, which is that like he was cobbled together by two people who were more excited about kind of the process of it than like what would happen next. Like Bonnie has no concept that she made a living thing.
Right.
Bonnie is a god. It's a story about a god.
Well, Bonnie and Woody, like it like Woody gave her the pieces, including the fork, which I don't think was in the craft supplies. I think it was just in the trash. So like that makes sense why he's just like, I'm trash. Like he's not craft supplies, he's trash.
Are we to assume that the necessary element for life is googly eyes?
Let's get. We're gonna get to that in the spoilers.
Yeah.
Googly eyes is all it takes, David. Googly eyes.
I have stuff to say about it in the spoilers, but Christy, why don't you finish your thought?
Sure. So my Frankenstein thing is that I think that it's like, and then like Frankenstein, you have Forky trying to figure out what his existence is and where does he fit and how does he make sense? And like, he doesn't feel part of this world that everybody's telling him he's a part of. He doesn't feel connected to it. He needs someone to guide him through it. Also, children love him. And then in I won't get into specifics, but there's even a reference to Frankenstein in like the post-credit stuff, which I thought was like when I put that together, I was so excited. I was like, they totally know what they're doing here. Like this is talking about like a concept of like being in existence, but I think it also totally fits with your arguments about like it being, a child, because it, Frankenstein was a child. It's a similar argument. But yeah, and I think Tony Hale brings a lot to that character. I think Tony Hale can do a lot with silly words. Like him just saying Bo, I could have listened to on a loop. But also I felt like it was that they managed to bring something so silly and so instantly memeable, because I 100% just want a gif of Forky saying trash. Like it's just, I can use it every day. I love it. But also that they put a real nuance into the character. When he and Woody have that little heart-to-heart, I went from being like, oh, this character's funny, to being like, oh, this character made me felt something, and it's a friggin' spork colored with marker.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
my
I think
favorite
that's fair enough.
character, David. My favorite character in the whole movie is the GI Joe that doesn't get the high fives.
Poor
Oh.
white outfit GI Joe.
Yeah.
That-
Twice.
The best.
All right, I have more thoughts on this movie, but it sounds like we all pretty much enjoyed it, and I'm glad for that. The movie underperformed per expectations. It made more money than Toy Story 3 on its opening weekend, which was 9 years ago. But I think people were expecting like up to 160. Disney itself predicted around 140. It made around 118 in reality, I think. Which it's been a rough summer for box office and also for movies themselves. We are only about halfway through. We'll see what happens the rest of summer. But before that, let's get to spoilers for Toy Story 4 starting right now. I mean, we haven't really talked about the metaphysical implications of Toy Story, but they're horrifying. I mean, like, there's a great article in Slate.com called Toy Story 4's Forky has haunting metaphysical implications for the Toy Story universe. I'll link to it in the show notes. I'd recommend you read it. But it essentially asks the question, right? Like, at what point does toy sentience begin? I would argue that it's with, like, the writing of the name on the feet. Jeff
The
Kanata,
name
you were
and
asking
the
earlier?
kiss. The name and the kiss.
yeah.
Like she literally kissed it into existence. Yeah.
Well,
See-
either way, she is a god, and
Yeah.
she
Yes.
wields her power without respect to its potency,
Yeah.
and knows not what she has wrought on the world.
Yeah.
She is to be feared, and she runs amok, and we don't know what else she will create, what other lives she will destroy in the process. Bonnie
Yeah,
must be stopped.
Maybe Toy Story 4 is a metaphor for actual real life existence. You know that to quote The Tempest, as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. You know,
Of course
and
you
that's why,
did that, Dave.
That's why life
Yeah.
is so chaotic. But seriously though, like here are just a few of the troubling things that Toy Story 4 brings up. Like number one, right? Like what point is a toy? Like and we see like later like he's got a little pipe cleaner on him, and like so that's like part of him now. But the thing is, he clearly recalls being trash, right? So do toys remember like the things that their parts
Yeah, their
were?
component state.
the component
Yeah.
states, you
Yeah.
know? And then later on, right, Bo Peep is like, hey, why would you want to be inside of a toy chest when you could have all this? And she like gestures to the world, and it's this amazing free universe. And so is the idea that toys can feel claustrophobic, like they can experience true freedom, but that like the vast majority of toys are forced, like consigned to live like kind of a slave-like existence.
Oh yeah.
if-
Well, they love it,
A lot
Dave.
of this
They
has
love
been
it.
addressed in the past movies, though. Like, I
Please.
mean, really, because like they talked about Jessie didn't want to go to the attic. She didn't want to be put in a box again. That's addressed in Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3 when they get put into the trash bag because, you know, Andy's a teenage boy who doesn't know how to put anything away properly. They address the concept of like death for toys they fear is becoming trash, but then at the end of Toy Story 3 when they're actually in a trash compactor, like death becomes very real and it's not just being in a grunt junkyard. Like it, and even the sentience thing was addressed in it might be Toy Story 3 now because I watched them all kind of in a block, but and Woody mentions, it must be 3 because he says, well, when we get put in the attic we can hang out with the Christmas ornaments, you guys love those. And
Right.
so it's not that everything is sentient, and I understand where people are trying to pinpoint the moment where Forky comes to life, but like Forky wouldn't physically come to life in her hands because that's not how toys work. I think it's more that within the narrative of the story between the Christmas toys, and even between, if you look in this movie where Bo Peep is considered a toy even though she's part of a lamp, and she has little like porcelain dolls that are not something you would really like consider a toy. They're more like figurines that count off how old Molly is. There's one for every age. It's like a keepsake thing. They also interact and move with the Barbie dolls. And I feel like what the implication is that anytime a child interacts with the toy as a plaything, that's when it's like it's definitely a toy.
I mean, I think it's when they're loved. right? That's the idea.
No,
is
because
that when something
there are
is
toys
loved,
that haven't been loved. Because
Mhm.
that was the whole thing with Stinky Pete. He lived in the box, but he is acknowledged as a toy. Like clearly at some point he was acknowledged as being a plaything, but he's never been played with, and that's like his whole deal in Toy Story 2.
Mm-hmm. I
Well-
like how this movie basically it is questioning existence in a really deep way, right? Are you only trash because you were made out of trash, and what is your main purpose as a toy? I do think it's asking deeper questions than the other movies in the series, even though it doesn't get, I think, as dark as that trash compactor scene in Toy
pretty
Story 3.
dark.
That was
I mean,
so dark.
We haven't even
Man.
talked about the ramifications of having your voice box forcibly removed from you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So-
some weird toy surgery, body dysmorphia horror scene. Like it gets pretty dark. And those ventriloquist dolls are straight
Oh,
up
man.
horror, dude. That's like
Yeah.
that's a haunting image if there ever was one.
Also, Christy, you say that the previous movies address those things I said. When you say addressed, I mean, yes, it does. It does acknowledge that the things I said, but that is still horrifying. Like Jesse not wanting to be put up, and
Sure.
Stinky Pete saying like, "Hey, do you want to like rot in a landfill for eternity?" That is still horrifying.
No,
even though-
totally.
yeah,
But
yeah.
my argument is just that people are acting like this is new stuff to Toy Story, where I feel like a lot of it is that a lot of us came into these movies when we were kids. And so, like, because I mean, I actually just wrote a piece that went up on Sci-Fi today. I think it's called like the 15 most deranged things that happened in Toy Story movies. But this has always been there. I mean, like, Woody was afraid of being dismembered and eaten in the first movie because he went and met Sid's toys and he thought that they were like mutants and horrible. And then he realized that there is a version of toys he doesn't understand, which are toys that have literally been combined into hybrids. And then in the second movie, he learns about the idea of being like put away. And then in the third movie, they learn about the idea of like literally being destroyed. Like these movies have always had an element of darkness to them, which I think is why they're so powerful. I think that we remember the cheery, bright stuff because they're colorful, adorable toys. But even the movies that I think we probably clung to in our greater youth, like when the first Toy Story came out, I think I was in 7th or 8th grade, and I was at the point where it wasn't really cool to admit you were watching cartoons anymore. But this was different because it was a computer cartoon, so like everybody was super into it. But like we were at the edge of that not being cool anymore. But like when I was a kid, like the stuff I clung to the deepest was the stuff that also acknowledged things that scared me. So like the idea of being lonely, the idea of whatever death was, like it seemed terrible. And like I think that children need a safe space to be told that like it makes sense that they're afraid, because I think that we too often as a society try to repress or push past a feeling instead of acknowledging that feeling first. And if you can just acknowledge, like in this movie where Woody recognizes his fear of like, what if I'm trash? And by just recognizing that, like, then he can get through it. And I think I was telling somebody the other day that I feel like so much about what this movie is about the journey of how hard it can be to get through that kind of whatever the change of life is. But like, first you have to recognize what you're afraid of about it, because if not, you're just, and that's interesting because Woody's always a bundle of nerves and always has to be in control and is always trying to fix things. And this is a situation where like there are things that he can't fix. There are things he cannot be in control of, and he has to let go. Like there's nothing for him to fix in the end. Like once we're in spoilers, I'm okay to talk about third act stuff.
Yep.
Okay. So like Gabby, like once he finds her a kid, like he's good. He doesn't, there's nothing else to solve, and he can kind of just go, like literally go off into the sunset and whatever his adventures are, like he's not responsible to anybody anymore. And that's kind of a terrifying but exciting thing. And I think that's the kind of the terror that this movie is dealing with. It's just
I really love
lonely.
that moment, by the way. Like the Gabby thing, like it didn't end the way we kind of thought it would. Like it's not like a nice, neat bow, and there's character growth for her and for Woody too. I think recognizing the fact that, oh, she's choosing this for herself, and this kid actually needs help right now. And yeah, he doesn't always have to take care of this other one child who he's worked so hard in the movie to try to please. There's a lot going on there. It's all good. Yeah.
Well, I liked how, again, reinforcing this idea that the movie's about parenthood. Towards the end of the movie, Woody sacrifices his voice box for Gabby so that she can kind of be with her kid. And then, like, she finally gets to talk to the kid through the voice box, and then the kid's like, no thanks. And I really felt like it drove home the notion that children, you can sacrifice everything for a child, and in the end, they may still betray you. Like that
You're describing my evening tonight, David.
right, that their needs and their wants are fickle and arbitrary and capricious. I know I just use like synonyms for the same concept, and that they will break your heart despite all that you've sacrificed. That you can like torture people and become a terrible person, all to like make their life better, but that in the end it might not end up meaning all that much.
So you think the message of this movie is that children are ingrates?
I mean, I think that's definitely part of it.
It's a message of this movie.
It's a message of the movie, but
perhaps the most important message of this movie.
But another message is also that, like, I think really what the movie's about is about, like, as you said, as you sort of have been describing, Christy, like being yourself and like that being the most important thing, right? That like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that she has a voice. I mean, the voice box helps. But at the end of the day, it's about like trying your best. It's about accepting who you are, and that it should be enough. And
I almost speaking of the voice box thing, by the way, I almost kind of wish they had went with like a broken voice for that character or something, like when she was actually speaking, because basically Woody giving up his voice box didn't really seem like, we know it meant something to him in terms of who he was as a working toy, but he could still like interact with all his friends and do everything he could do normally.
That's
it's just point. He's different when it comes to the other kids. I kind of would have, I don't know, maybe it sounds cruel, but something where like he actually had to give up something and he's not the Woody we know anymore and he actually sounds different or something like that.
Yeah,
instead it's just
Go
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I also like that they effectively insofar as the Gabby is a villain, they let there be a female villain, which is exciting because we haven't seen that yet in a Toy Story movie. Like Sid was sort of the villain of the first one, and then you have Stinky Pete and you have Lotso, but like
they definitely didn't waste any time, by the way, with her. It's just like, she's surrounded by these creepy dolls. She's bad news.
Well, even her design is off-putting for a moment, and it took me a second to figure out why. And it's because I remember those dolls, and it's like she doesn't full on have the blinking eyes that Big Baby did in the second or third movie, but she has the ones where they like tilt a little, and the shimmer of the eye is just a little creepy. I thought that was a really nice threading of the needle where she's cute but also a little upsetting. And then those dolls, the dummies are so. What was funny is I'm sitting in a packed theater that is full of adults and children, and every time the dummies showed up, you heard adults in that theater go,
yeah.
And it was like they were just upsetting, especially when they sit like gargoyles and their heads just do the 360 spin. Which
They're
again,
so
rewatching the movies.
They're so brilliant not to have them actually have voices of their own. I loved that.
Yeah. No
which that's kind of a plot hole thing that's weird to me because like the other toys don't require a voice box to have voices, so the idea that ventriloquist dummies doesn't make sense to me, but I don't care because it's so effective that the only sound they make is that horrible like clattering sound of their jaws.
The whole point of them, right, is that they have no voices, right? So
and at one point it just goes.
Yeah. Oh man. It's that Goosebumps. It's that Goosebumps book cover made into like a movie.
Yeah.
And that's kind of haunted me throughout my whole childhood. Yeah.
Right. And like before that, like that movie with Anthony Hopkins, Magic. And I think there was Tales from the Crypt about a dummy. I mean, like dummies are inherently upsetting because we want them to look human. It's that uncanny valley thing before we had an uncanny valley to understand, where you want them to look human enough that it's not weird that they're talking, but you want them to not look inhuman enough that it's clearly an act. And it just puts them in this neutral zone that when they are not functioning as a tool of a puppet, they are horrifying. And I think that's really fun to kind of see that enacted as like minions, and also that they're not ultimately bad. Like in the end when she's like, "Thank you, Benson," and he just like wanders off. I am curious if that means that oh my god, I was gonna say I'm wondering if things were gonna change at the Toy Antique store for the rest of them. Guys, we have not talked about Duke Kaboom yet.
Yeah, I was gonna mention Duke Kaboom. What do we think of Duke Kaboom?
It's good.
Keanu Sans.
Yeah.
He's the Canuck with all the luck. He's amazing. It's so fun to watch Keanu Reeves like being silly. Like between this and Always Be My Maybe this summer, like into it.
Yeah, I thought he was a delight. Very good. It is the summer of Keanu, man. Between
Game of Thrones,
Keanu.
full effect, baby.
between
All
John
good.
Wick Chapter 3, Cyberpunk, and now this, it's crazy times. Crazy times.
It's all coming up, Keanu. Yeah. Also, Key and Peele are in this movie. And I thought used really well too. Like literally
great.
conjoined. Yeah.
So great.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention one other thing, one other theory that I thought was really interesting. I'll link to this in the show notes. It's this piece that John Negroni wrote over at his blog, johnnegroni.com. And he was talking about how, like, he was reflecting on whether this movie is ableist, right? This is this idea of, like, that Gabby can't be like achieve who she wants to be unless she actually has her like full voice function. And I think it's interesting to reflect on because like not a lot of people reflect on, or not a lot of people reflect on it as it applies to mainstream movies. At least I don't see a lot of it online. And John writes about how he was born with a genetic hearing disorder and how he got hearing aids. And he says, quote here, "My version of getting a new voice box was getting hearing aids for the first time." And he says here, "If anyone told me that I shouldn't have gone through what I did in order to get hearing aids simply because people should just love me for me, I'd politely tell that person to mind their own business. Granted, that doesn't have to be the same response for someone else with a different disability, but that's the point. The beauty I saw in Toy Story 4 was in its embrace of other worldviews as plausible and worthy, and the fact that not everyone will want the same things. That not everyone will want the same things you do in life is hard, but a useful lesson to learn. In the scene where Gabby is eventually accepted by a lost child, they are indeed at least partly connected by the voice box working. I see this as a wonderful moment because for the first time, Gabby is heard for who she truly is. Sadly, not everyone can fix something like this. Woody can't force Bonnie to love him like Andy did. Eventually, he stops trying because he knows she'll be okay without him, and he'll be okay without her." End quote. So it's a great piece about like what that final scene means with Gabby like connecting with that girl at the fair. But what's been most interesting to me about seeing the discussion around this movie is like I did not think that like Toy Story 4 would produce this many different interpretations of what it means. And I do think that's the sign of a rich film when you have like differing and often conflicting interpretations of what a movie means. And I actually think that's to the film's credit. So love that there's all this dialogue around the movie, and even on this podcast there's been like a few differences. Any closing thoughts about the movie anyone want to mention before we wrap up here? Sounds like
I did.
Yeah.
I know that Devindra brought this up, but the sequence where Bonnie goes to kindergarten for the first time.
Oh man.
That's my Monday, Wednesday, and Friday every week. I mean, I took my son today, and today's Monday. He clings to my leg when we walk still. The first week was brutal, but it's something that kids go through, and just seeing that depicted so beautifully got to me, and it's a great sequence in the movie.
I also hated all those kids in that classroom. By the way, it was like poor Bonnie all alone on her own table, and the kid just like comes and steals her toys too. Like, come on, teacher, pay attention. You should not be letting kids sit alone. What's going on?
A couple things I want to point out. I think that the person I felt most bad for, like the person I had the most sympathy for in this movie, was the dad character.
Oh, poor dad.
Yeah.
Which it just felt like. Can you believe like if all this random shit was happening, and you had no explanation, like how much that would drive you nuts?
Also, yeah, the toys are basically getting homicidal now. I guess
Well,
just for fun.
Well, they say like, "Hey, we should put the dad in jail," which makes you wonder how many people have been framed for toy crimes in the past, right? Like,
in the Toy Story universe, it seems like very common.
Yeah, it could be infinite.
Can't wait for Law and Order toys.
Hashtag free the dads.
Yeah, free the dads.
Yeah.
And then, but the thing, the moment that made me cry was when they say goodbye at the end. Like Woody says goodbye to all of his friends, and it just reinforces like, hey, we've had these characters in our life. Like there has been more years in my life where Toy Story movies have been coming out, have been being released than not, right? Like this franchise has now been alive for decades, And this really did feel like, okay, there might be a Toy Story 5, there might be more adventures, but like that it will be fundamentally different, right? Woody will be like out on his own with Bo Peep, like they'll have a whole different life. They're separate for the first time ever, him and the rest of the gang. And I did feel like, I thought Toy Story 3 was the end, but really this one is the end, maybe, probably. So anyway.
Let's wait 10 years, yeah.
Let's wait 10 years. We'll see what happens. That's going to bring us to the end of our review. Yep, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just, I think my final thought on it is that I think that there are all these narratives and metaphors you can pull from the film. But what I really liked about it is like looking at overall a lot of the arcs in it is so much of it is about facing your fears and in various iterations so that like maybe kids will pick up these lessons because like Bonnie's afraid to go to kindergarten, but then she like finds, she creates Forky and she's okay. And like, Woody is afraid to live a life outside of the safety of the life he knows, but he's afraid and he's okay. Forky like faces becoming a toy. Like even Duke Kaboom like faces his fear of failure. And he does something incredible. And like, I think that to put these stories in so many different ways so that kids can take that in is really powerful. Like I've had, my nieces are both under the age of 5, and it's amazing to watch a movie with them because they watch it like they're so locked on, and then after they want to talk to you about it, and like they don't just tell you what happened in the movie, they like explain like what they learned. And it's just really incredible. Like my older niece watched The Grinch when the new Grinch came out, and she said at the end, and I guess spoilers for The Grinch if you don't know that, but she said she said he can make friends because he's not mad anymore. And like I thought that was incredible for like a really little kid to pick up. And when I met the producer at some networking event, and I was like, I have to tell you, because I was like, I also think The Grinch is actually another really powerful story about how to process emotion, and that one particularly anger. But like I think movies like this that are being written by people who clearly understand how to communicate this stuff and how to hopefully communicate it to children, like I think kids will walk away not just being like that was fun or whatever, but like holding these stories with us like we held stories with us growing up, but with a much more mindful sense of what children's entertainment is today than it was when we were growing up. And I don't know. I think it's really cool that we as adults get to have this conversation and like tear into it and be like, oh, maybe it's saying this or maybe it's saying this and it could be about this and it could be about this. But I think to a lot of kids, it's going to be about, what do you do when you feel lonely? What do you do when you feel like nobody likes you? What do you do when you're afraid that you're not good enough? And it's like, it gives you little answers to that. And it's like, you're going to be okay. This is what we do. Yeah. And like, I just think that that's a really beautiful message to send. Mm-hmm. And with like such, a colorful candy cave wrapper where they're just going to keep going back to. I mean, my nieces have already watched the first 3 Toy Stories a million times. Like, I'm sure I'll see this a bunch of times more with them. So I'm very excited about that.
Good life lesson, get off the shelf, basically.
Yeah.
Indeed. All right. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of our review of Toy Story 4 and the end of this episode of the podcast. You can find more episodes of the podcast at /filmcast.com. You can also email us at /filmcast@gmail.com. Our theme song comes from AdamWarrock.com. Our spoiler bumper comes from filmmaker Kyle Hillinger. This episode was edited and produced by Beatty Zhang. Stay tuned to hear what we'll be discussing next week. In the meantime, Christy Puchko, where can people find more of your work on the internet?
I write every day at pajiba.com. I'm on Twitter at Christy Puchko. That's KristyPuchko. And I have a lot of stuff coming up between film coverage and traveling. I'm going to go to Fantasia next month for some genre stuff. So if you go to decadentcriminals.com, that's where I collect all of my reviews. And at the end of festivals, I always do a highlights post. So everything I wrote at that festival you can find in one convenient location since I write for a bunch of sites.
Cool. Devindra Hardawar, where can you find more of your work?
Oh, I'm at Devindra on Twitter. I write about techandgadget.com. I was also on This Week in Tech this week. And you can check that episode out at twit.tv. I know you were there recently too, Jeff. So check out all our stuff. I always love those folks. And also doing a tech podcast at nomortech.net. That's no with a K.
How about you, Jeff?
Hey, if you're into Game of Thrones or fantasy or Lord of the Rings, give my new show a shot. I am so proud of it. It's called The Dungeon Run. It is a live play Dungeons & Dragons show where I am the dungeon master, which means I'm the storyteller. I'm the guy making everything up and leading a group of adventurers through this wild tale. like I said, I've never been more proud of something in my entire career. It's a blast. These players are awesome. You can find the show on YouTube or as an audio podcast anywhere you get podcasts, but we record it live and stream it Wednesday nights, 6 p.m. Pacific time at caffeine.tv/The Dungeon Run. I also do a video game podcast called DLC, which you can find at 5by5.tv/DLC. And I'm on Twitter at Jeff Kanata, which is spelled with 2 N's and 1 T.
Find all of my stuff at davechen.net. Next week, we will be reviewing Yesterday, the new Danny Boyle film. We'll be releasing that review right before July 4th, the holiday, which comes on a Thursday this year. So kind of awkward when it comes to the work holidays. But Yesterday is the movie we'll be reviewing on next week's episode of the podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.